One farmer where I grew up had a shower nozzle turned up on the highest, warm water. They shoved the nozzle down his throat.
Dr. Roets, thanks so much for stopping by. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So for our listeners who are not familiar with South Africa, they might be seeing a tweet from President Trump here or a tweet from Elon Musk, but they don't actually know the roots of South African history. And so they look at the racial issues that have arrived there, and they have sort of a left-wing view that's been drilled into them that essentially this is just a matter of decolonization, colonialism. Why don't we go back to the beginning? What are Afrikaners doing in South Africa?
Well, thank you, Ben, for having me on the show. So the Afrikaners' history in South Africa goes back to 1652, which is before the Declaration of Independence. So we've been there for hundreds of years, almost 400 years. It started initially as a settlement or a refreshment station in the Cape, where Cape Town is today. And eventually they were joined by other groups coming in from Europe, French, Germans, and then in smaller numbers, initially some other groups as well. Later, the English came, so we have a big white Anglo community in South Africa. And we've been there for hundreds of years. We're not Dutch anymore. We have developed our own culture. We have our own language. We named ourselves after the continent.
I know that some South Africans are going to disagree with that, saying you guys have been Europeans all this time. And then now it's democracy. Now you're South Africans. How does that work? I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but guys, listen, we are all South Africans. South Africa, our land, we have a new constitution that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Stop playing with
Afrikaners. Our language is Afrikaans. And we have our own literature, our own poetry, our own philosophy. We have all these things that we have had again, developed for hundreds of years. And over time, obviously, in any country like this, our history is very similar to the American story in a sense. Also with the pioneers, the great track that we had into the interior. In America, you had the track to the west. So, and there's in a story like this, there's always friction, and it's almost like news. People like to focus on the friction and ignore the cooperation. But there were incredible stories of cooperation between communities in South Africa. But when you talk about history in South Africa now, you're only allowed to talk about the friction, when the truth is that we've had a long history of cooperating with communities and so forth. And yes, one thing.
Can I say that Mr. Ernst, bro, he looks well put together. He got ready for this interview. My boy pushed his hair back. He really went out there to push propaganda, as people call it on Twitter. They always say, oh, he's telling the Americans propaganda, fake news. But we know what's happening in South Africa, bro. It's true. Trump is right. Elon is right. Ernst is right. Ben is right. Tucker Carlson. Everybody and their mama is right as far as the depressing situation in South Africa. I mean, they've already destroyed trading relations with the US as we speak. It's quite a tough situation.
But now that the Cape was colonized around the time of the Napoleonic Wars by the British, we then moved in towards the interior. We had some battles, we had some treaties, we bought land. There were some areas that weren't settled. You're not allowed to say that, but South Africa wasn't densely populated back then. We started the Boer republics, the Transvaal and the Free State, which led to the Anglo-Boer War after gold and diamonds were discovered. After which South Africa became a union in 1910, which means all the republics, the kingdoms of the African tribes and so forth, the colonies, everything was combined into one big whole, which became South Africa. And then, of course, we had the apartheid history, and this is sort of a very quick overview, leading to the negotiated settlement in 1994, which led to this new South Africa, which was celebrated all over the world as a miracle, and it was sort of the shining example of what the United Nations can do to save a country. And the Constitution was celebrated, and now we are here, where it turns out that story, this miracle story, was not as shining as people would have liked it to be.
And I think it's that part that is puzzling to people, because they've been taught the miracle story. They've seen the movies about Nelson Mandela. They've seen the films and TV shows about the great moment when apartheid ended. And there's sort of been a ban publicly on talking about the problems that exist in South Africa post that, because to mention that there are some fairly significant problems, as it turns out, in post-apartheid South Africa is seen as some sort of endorsement of apartheid itself, which is a false binary.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the problem that we have, is we have this narrative that you can choose between the apartheid system and the current system. And there's only those two options. You have nothing else to choose from. And so you have to choose what's currently happening in South Africa. And if you don't choose that, or if you say this is a problem, that by definition means you want to go back. You want to go to the apartheid system.
That is true, bro. People say that. People do say that. They accuse white people in South Africa of always wishing for apartheid to come back. The reason the DA has never been able to grow beyond 22% or something like this in recent history is because precisely of that reason, that people think the DA is going to bring apartheid back. It's like, bro, how do you conclude that, bro? It's like, how do you conclude? People are so down in South Africa. Man, I'm telling you right now. You know how they say the average IQ in Africa is 70 IQ points? Bro, I believe that. Right now, I believe that, man. How do you conclude things like that?
Which no one wants to do. The fact is that the apartheid system didn't work. The current system isn't working, and we need something else. We need a better system. But we are very happy that a lot of people are taking note about what's happening in South Africa, because this has been going on for decades. And I think the pendulum has swung so far to the one side, or to the left, you could say, that it's the narrative about South Africa has become so detached from the realities on ground level that it's just not possible to ignore what's happening in South Africa. And so we are grateful that people are talking about this, and people should be talking about it more.
So let's talk about the history of South Africa since the end of apartheid. Again, that's where most people's story ends, is end of apartheid, happily ever after. What has actually happened? What were the political transformations that took place in South Africa after the settlement of 94?
Well, one way, I think, to understand what's happening is the negotiations for the new South Africa started immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that was, the end of history era. And there was a sort of a narrative that capitalism and liberalism has won, and it's going to be the standard, the gold standard all over the world eventually. And we need to write a constitution for South Africa along these lines. And the problem with that in South Africa is that it's a very big country. It's very diverse. It's more like Europe than like the US in a certain sense. It's almost as big as Western Europe, at least. And it's many diverse nations and peoples living there. And so the ruling party, the ANC, back then they said, the way we're going to do this is we want what they call a national democratic revolution. And that essentially means using democracy as a way to promote socialist ideals. And the way they did
That's a good definition of it. By far, that is the best definition of it. They used democracy to promote socialist policies. Facts, bro. They tried to infuse socialism into democracy. They've succeeded in doing that, but the results are horrible for the people of this country, bro. That is facts.
He said it's going to be a two-phase revolution. Phase one is present ourselves as very liberal, very open-minded, very pro-democracy, to get more and more support in South Africa and all over the world, and which worked obviously brilliantly. And then the theory or the strategy that they wrote it out, it's all on paper. They said that once we have the power, or the levers of power, as they put it, then we should eventually move to the second phase of the revolution. And that means using the state mechanisms to become much more aggressive in implementing socialist policies. Mm-hmm. And so the first big one was 1996 with in America you call it DEI, we call it BEE, which is Black Economic Empowerment, but it has nothing to do with empowerment. It's handing out social grants, and it's discriminating against people who aren't Black. So they started with that in 1996, which became more and more aggressive over time, up to the point where there are now more than 140 race laws in South Africa today. So that was one strand. Another strand was the property rights thing, where they said in 2018...
And people would want to say, no, there's no 140 race-based laws in South Africa. It's actually, to be more precisely, it's 142 race-based laws in this country. Everything always cuts through the racial lines, and Black people always get preference as far as the laws in this country are concerned. It's true. It is true. It is fact.
We're going to start a process to change the property rights clause in the Constitution so that the state can expropriate private property without compensation, which is just confiscation of property. So that's another strand. And then there's also the strand of the hate speech and real hate speech. I mean, actually targeting a group of people, identifying them based on their ethnicity, and then saying, we need to go out and kill those people. It's not offensive speech. It's
Kill the farmer, kill the Boer. Is that not happening? It is happening in this country. When Ronaldo Goes, when he made a statement comparing what South Africans would feel like if he started saying, kill the K word, kill the K word. When Malema was singing, kill the farmer, kill the Boer. When he compared that, the South African Human Rights Commission came after him, destroyed him. But you find guys like Abu Malema and Andile Mkhitam coming on here on the internet saying the most racist stuff. Nothing happens to them, but everybody else, is a problem. Now I just want to live in a country where everything is equal, everything is the same. Reverse racism is racism, ladies and gentlemen. We shouldn't be living in a country like that, especially where majority people are black people. Why do we need laws that project the majority? Against who exactly? Bro, it doesn't make sense. Let us judge people based on the merits of their own character. Stop this group thing of black people, women, whatever.
It's calling for the Boers to be slaughtered. And that's combined with political speeches, with statements such as, and this is a direct quote, all white people are criminals and they should be treated as such. And then these politicians would burst out chanting, kill the Boer, kill the farmer. And the Boer is, of course, a reference to the Afrikaner people. And this has been getting worse and worse and worse, up to the point where, again, as I said, you cannot ignore what's happening in South Africa. But what's really strange is how people are in South Africa and unfortunately in America and some other places are trying to deny the existence of the problem by saying it doesn't exist. But so the farm killings, you have the names of the people who have been murdered. I mean, I knew people who have been murdered on farms. And for someone to say, well, this problem doesn't exist, is really, really bizarre.
So let's talk about the details of that, because a few years ago, this started to pop up in the news. I remember we covered it on the show at the time. That's when you and I first got in contact, actually. And the take from the media is that, statistically speaking, it's not a big deal. People are being killed at kind of the normal rate that people are killed. There was a comparison between the rate of killing of farmers in rural South Africa to the rate of killing of people in Johannesburg, which is notorious for having significant violence problems. Talk a little bit about that. What's been happening with the killing of farmers?
Well, the counter-argument that you presented now is based on the idea that there are other problems as well, therefore you shouldn't talk about this problem. And the people who are saying this is a problem, we should do something about this, are not saying that there aren't other problems. And so one, just to point out the lunacy in this, is one way to respond to this is there's a big problem in South Africa with the poaching of rhinos. But no one is saying, why are you talking about rhino poaching? You are discriminating against elephants that are also being poached. The fact is that rhinos are poached in disproportionate numbers and it has very particular consequences. And so to say that the farm murders have to stop is not to say that there isn't gang-related violence in Johannesburg or Cape Town. But as far as the murders are concerned, it started in 1990 and it gradually got worse. And and there's been some debate on how to calculate it. If you use the police statistics, I think the police data is quite accurate in terms of the murders, but not in terms of the attacks. The attacks are much more like this shadow number that you don't know of than what the police say. But according to police data, if you look at a period of 2 years, there were 2 farm attacks every day in South Africa, during which 2 people were murdered every week. So it's been going on and on and on up, and it's a small community. There's the farming community every day. To police data, if you look at a period of 2 years, there were 2 farm attacks every day in South Africa, during which 2 people were murdered every week. So it's been going on and on and on up, and it's a small community. There's the farming community is there are about 30,000 commercial farmers in South Africa. So it's a small community, and if you're a farmer in South Africa, you know people who have been murdered. That's just the reality. Or you have been attacked yourself. And I personally know people who've been attacked, people who've been killed, and so forth. So
but it's like what people don't understand is like when farmers are being attacked, bro, it has impact on our food security as South Africans. So it's not that other things are not happening, as he clearly states. there are other things happening, but because our farmers are being attacked, these are the people who feed our nation. These are the people who contribute so much to our agriculture. I mean, agriculture in South Africa, as Wandile Sihlobo is always saying, that our agriculture exports are actually bringing in a lot of money into the country. And it's like, if we are taking those people, bro, it's like, do you understand how much money and how much jobs you are impacting with destroying farmers? That is the actual point about it.
So that's the one aspect, is just the rate at which it's happening. The second aspect is the brutality, and it's the worst tortures you can imagine. Really, I can't think of worse methods of torture than the ones that we've seen in South Africa, with gouging out of the eyes. We've had one farmer where I grew up had a shower nozzle turn up on the highest, warm water. They shoved the nozzle down his throat. And there are many, many, many such examples. I mean, I can go on. Every torture you can imagine has been applied during these.
And these are race-based murders?
So not all the victims are white. The victims are people of all races. I'm not aware of a black farmer that has been tortured. So it's a big phenomenon, and a lot is happening, and surely not all of them are politically motivated. Some of them certainly are, and we know that because sometimes the attackers write political slogans on the walls during these attacks. Or they would chant slogans, and then the survivors would come and say, the attackers said something like, "Die white man, Viva Malema," who's the politician who's chanting this, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer."
How true is that? Can somebody confirm that? How true is that? What he just said about the writings on the wall and the slogans being chanted when these things happen. How true is that, bro?
They are obviously and overtly politically motivated, and some of them probably aren't, or some of them aren't. But we don't know those statistics in terms of the motivations. But it's very, very alarming.
So when it comes to the politics here, and the excuse that you hear in the world media is when you see videos of Malema saying "kill the Boer," number one, you'll hear, well, he doesn't actually mean it. It's just song. Who cares? Which is absurd on its face.
Crazy.
But the other thing they'll say is, well, he's part of a party that isn't actually the governing party. ANC is the governing party. So why are we focusing so much on Malema, for example? Well, isn't ANC just fine?
Yeah. So he is. Some people have called him the most influential. I think that's an exaggeration, but some have called him the most influential politician in Africa. He's certainly one of the most influential. And certainly in South Africa, his party has had some difficulty in the last election. But the thing is, ideologically, he's not far away from the EFF. In terms of rhetoric, he's much worse. He's not far away from the ruling party, from the ANC. In terms of rhetoric, it's worse. And so a few years ago, he made a speech where one of the statements he made during that speech was, we are going to slit the throat of whiteness. And then everyone was applauding. And then 2 days after, the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, publicly said, we invite this guy to come back and join our party because we can see that deep down in his heart, he's still a member of the ANC. So we do find that the ruling party is a bit more subtle in its approach, although just as racist in terms of the policies that they are implementing. And then we have these parties to the left of them that are much more radical. But again, ideologically, there's not much of a difference. They both, the ruling party and the EFF, think of people like Robert Mugabe as a hero. Mao Zedong, they think is a hero. Joseph Stalin, even Maduro. They go all these Fidel Castro, all these communist examples, and then they would not only say that these people are heroes, they would say we need to duplicate their policies. We need to bring their policies, but in South Africa it's going to work. In as far as they would be willing to concede that it hasn't worked, they would say this time it's going to work.
Well, that's all for now.
Bro, that is true, bro. That is what's up in South Africa. The situation is horrible. Like, even me as a young black man, I'm scared because there's not a lot of opportunities. Like, I look at my siblings growing up, I look at opportunities for myself as well. It's like a lot of things are limited. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a scary, so like, I can only imagine what white people feel like in this country, because it's like, there's laws actually stopping them from getting bursaries if they are in school because they are white. Majority people that are going to be prioritized are black. It's like, it's crazy times. We need to embrace merit. Stop this groupthink. Stop all of it. I would Trump are right about what is happening in this country. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Ladies and gentlemen, If you like this video, you know what to do. Please hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications so that you are notified every time we upload a new video. I'm out of here.